He found her barefoot in the middle of a frozen road, hugging her belly with tears streaming down her face. She'd been betrayed, discarded like trash by the man who vowed to protect her. He didn't ask questions. He just opened the door. What neither of them knew was that this night would change their lives forever. Let's begin. It was nearly midnight when Caleb Whitaker's rusted Dodge truck groaned down the icy back road outside Cedar Hollow, its headlights catching the silhouette of a woman stumbling in the snow. Caleb hit the brakes hard. She stood there, barefoot, shivering, clutching a round belly beneath a torn cardigan. He cursed under his breath and jumped out, boots crunching on the frozen gravel. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She didn't look up at first. Her lips were cracked, eyes red, her skin pale as frost. One hand gripped her swollen stomach like she was holding it together with sheer will. Caleb shrugged off his flannel and wrapped it around her. She finally looked at him, brown eyes wide with panic, then relief. "Please, I didn't know where else to go." That was all she said before she collapsed into his arms. By the time he got her into the truck, the heater blasting full force, Caleb could feel the tremble in her body. Not just from the cold, from something deeper, something broken. "Name's Caleb. I live just up the road," he said gently as he drove. "Got a guest room. My boy's asleep. You'll be safe there." She flinched at the word safe, as if it were foreign. "Thank you," she whispered. I'm Grace." "Grace," Caleb repeated, stealing a glance at her through the rear view. That's fitting. Caleb's house wasn't much. A two-bedroom cabin with creaky floors and a wood-burning stove. But it was warm and it was honest. He helped Grace inside, guided her to the couch, fetched a warm blanket and a mug of peppermint tea. She held it like it was sacred. "You're pregnant," he said softly. Not a question. She nodded, her hand protectively cupping her belly. "Is there someone I should call? A husband? Family?" Her face darkened. "He sold me." Caleb blinked. "What?" Grace didn't say more. Her jaw tightened. 1,000 words unsaid hung in the silence between them. So Caleb didn't push. He just sat beside her, poured himself a cup of tea, and said, "You can stay as long as you need. I won't ask questions unless you're ready." And that was the first night she slept without nightmares. The next morning, Caleb found Grace sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in his old flannel, watching the frost melt from the trees. A mug of coffee rested on her lap, untouched. He stepped outside quietly, his 7-year-old son, Owen, still snoring inside the house. The air smelled of pine and morning dew. "You didn't sleep much," Caleb said gently. Grace shook her head, eyes still fixed on the forest line. "I haven't in a long time." She looked different in the daylight, still fragile, but there was a quiet strength beneath the fear. Her hands rested over her belly with a strange tenderness, like she was both protecting something precious and bracing herself for heartbreak. "You sure you're okay staying here?" Caleb asked. "I know this ain't the Four Seasons." Grace glanced at him, and a half-smile cracked her lips. "It's the first place in months where I don't feel like I'm about to be hurt again. That means more than you think." Later that day, Caleb cooked breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, and the best he could offer, burnt bacon. Owen finally woke up, padding into the kitchen with bed hair sticking up like a tornado had hit him. He paused when he saw Grace at the table. Caleb crouched beside him. "That's Miss Grace. She's going to be staying with us for a while, buddy." Owen stared at her, squinting like he was sizing her up. Then, suddenly, he smiled and waved. "Hi, I'm Owen. Want to see my Legos?" Grace blinked. The wall around her cracked just a little. "Sure," she said, voice soft. And that's how it began. How the woman who hadn't been shown kindness in months sat on the floor an hour later, 8 months pregnant, helping a little boy build a crooked spaceship. That night, after Owen went to bed, Caleb found her sitting on the porch again. She finally opened up. "My husband, Dylan, he found out I couldn't give him the perfect child he wanted. I was high risk, so he made a deal, money for my disappearance. Said I'd cost him more than I was worth." Caleb's knuckles whitened on the porch railing. "He handed me off like I was property. Said I'd be someone else's problem. But the man who paid for me just left me on the roadside when he realized I wouldn't entertain him." Her voice broke. "I walked for hours, just praying someone would stop." Caleb didn't speak. He just sat beside her. And after a long silence, he said, "You're not a problem. You're a person, and you're safe here. That kid in your belly deserves better. And so do you." Tears fell from Grace's eyes. But they weren't from fear this time. They were from something warmer. Hope. Grace had been at Caleb's cabin for a week, and the snow outside had begun to thaw, but something else was slowly melting too. The distance she'd built between herself and the world. She still didn't laugh much, but she smiled more. She hummed while folding laundry. She offered to cook dinner, even though she mostly made grilled cheese and soup. And she started brushing Owen's hair in the morning while he told her about his dreams. Caleb noticed every small change. One evening, as he stacked firewood behind the house, he watched through the kitchen window. Grace was wearing a loose sweatshirt and yoga pants. Nothing fancy, but she looked peaceful. She was helping Owen build a blanket fort out of chairs and couch cushions. It was the first time he saw her look at home. That night, Caleb brewed 2 mugs of chamomile tea and joined her in the living room. Owen was already fast asleep under his spaceship fort, a flashlight still on beside his pillow. "Not bad," he said, nodding toward the sleeping boy. "He's usually not out that quick. You must be magic." Grace chuckled quietly. "He's got a big heart, like his dad." Caleb looked at her, surprised. "I've never really been called that before." "Well, you took in a stranger with nothing but the clothes on her back. I don't know many men who'd do that without asking something in return." Caleb sipped his tea, his tone quiet. "I didn't do it to be noble. I just couldn't leave you there. Anyone with a conscience would have stopped." "No," she said firmly. "Most wouldn't. They'd pretend they didn't see me. Or worse, look and keep driving." Silence settled between them like a soft blanket. Then she asked, "What about Owen's mom?" Caleb paused. "She left a long time ago. Said she didn't want to be a mother. We were barely adults when he was born. I raised him myself." He let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Sometimes I think I have no idea what I'm doing. But he's still alive, so I must be doing something right." "You're doing a lot right," Grace said softly. "This place, this warmth, it saved me." She set her tea down and shifted, one hand cradling her belly. "I felt so alone. Even when I was married, I was just a thing in Dylan's world. But here, it's different. It feels real. It feels human." Her voice cracked slightly, and Caleb instinctively reached across the couch, covering her hand with his. "You're not alone anymore." The following days moved in slow, healing rhythms. Grace took on little chores. She started organizing the pantry. She even repaired the zipper on Caleb's old winter jacket. She didn't ask for much, but she gave more than she realized. Caleb had a garage beside the cabin where he repaired trucks and chainsaws for locals. One afternoon, while Grace watched from the porch with a cup of cocoa, he fixed a neighbor's busted snowmobile. "You ever worked on engines?" Caleb asked, wiping grease off his hands. Grace shook her head with a faint smile. "Not unless microwaves count." He chuckled. "Fair. But if you ever want to learn, I'll teach you. You'd be surprised what your hands can do when you stop telling yourself you're not capable." She stared at him for a second, silent, but clearly moved. Then she said, "Maybe I will." That night, it snowed again. Thick, soft flakes falling like cotton from the sky. Grace stood at the window after dinner, staring out at the white. Caleb approached her, voice low. "You okay?" "I've been thinking, when I have this baby, what then? I have no money, no job, no family left. I can't stay here forever." Caleb's answer was immediate. "Why not?" She looked up at him, startled. "I mean it," he continued. "You could stay. I've got space. Owen adores you, and I wouldn't mind having someone around who makes better grilled cheese than me." Grace laughed, really laughed for the first time. Then she said, "Caleb, you don't even know everything about me. I don't need to. I know what kind of person you are." She looked down, a single tear tracing her cheek. "You have no idea what that means to me." And right then, something shifted, not just in the room, but in both of their hearts. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something real. The sound of hammering echoed through Caleb's workshop as the winter light poured through the frosted windows. Grace stood nearby, sweeping sawdust from the floor, her belly now so lard she waddled more than walked, but she refused to sit idle. Caleb glanced over every few minutes, half admiring, half worried. "You sure you should be up?" Grace smirked. "I'm pregnant, not porcelain." He grinned, but said nothing. Truth was, she had changed in the past few weeks. Her posture had straightened, her voice had steadied, and the haunted look in her eyes had nearly faded. But then came a knock. A hard, Rapid bang on the front door of the cabin. Grace stiffened, broom mid-air. Caleb noticed instantly. She was frozen. He dropped his tools, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked toward the front of the house. Grace followed, slowly. Caleb opened the door cautiously, stepping in front of Grace instinctively. Two men stood outside, one in a charcoal gray coat, and the other in a leather jacket with a clipboard in his hand. "Good morning," the clipboard guy said. "We're looking for a woman named Grace Halden. She's considered missing, possibly endangered. There's been a report." Caleb didn't move. "Who reported her missing?" "Her husband," the man said smoothly, flipping a paper. "Dylan Halden." At the sound of the name, Grace let out a quiet, involuntary gasp. Her hand gripped Caleb's sleeve. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think he'd find me here." Caleb stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. "You've got no warrant. She's not in danger. And she's not missing. She left him. She's pregnant," the other man interjected, "and legally married. That makes her his dependent, sir." Caleb's jaw clenched. "You really want to argue morals with me right now? He sold her like cattle and dumped her in the snow. You think I'd let him touch her again?" There was a pause, just long enough to reveal the discomfort on their faces. These men weren't law enforcement. They were private. Hired. "I'll make this real simple," Caleb continued, stepping closer. "If you or that bastard shows up again, I'll drag his name through every paper in this state. And then I'll let Grace speak for herself. You want that mess?" The two men exchanged a look. Then, reluctantly, turned back toward their black SUV. Before getting in, clipboard guy said, "This isn't over." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "It is for you." Back inside, Grace was trembling. Caleb took her hands gently and led her to the couch. "He found me," she whispered. "He never lets go. Never. He doesn't get to own you anymore, Grace." She looked at him, tearful, but something in her eyes changed, a flicker of steel. "I won't run again," she said. "I've spent too long being afraid." That night, Grace didn't sleep. Instead, she took out a crumpled folder she kept hidden in her duffel bag. Inside were records, proof of how Dylan had funneled money, falsified documents, and used her name to open offshore accounts. She handed it to Caleb across the dinner table. "I never wanted to use this. I kept thinking if I left quietly, he'd just let me go." Caleb opened the folder, eyes scanning the pages. "You've been holding this all along." Grace nodded slowly. "He never thought I had it in me. But if he tries to come after me again, I want to bury him." There was silence. Then Caleb nodded. "Then we'll bury him together." Over the next few days, Grace contacted a lawyer in the near city, one who specialized in domestic abuse and financial fraud. With Caleb by her side and the evidence in hand, she began building a case that could destroy Dylan's reputation and protect her and the baby for good. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming her name, her dignity, her future. And every day, as she walked the cabin floors, feeling the life grow inside her, she realized something powerful. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting. On a quiet evening near the end of March, Grace sat in the rocking chair by the fireplace. Her eyes were on the flames, but her mind was far away. Caleb came in, carrying a fresh stack of firewood. She turned toward him and whispered, "What if I fail?" He paused. "Then you'll stand up again. You've already survived what most people couldn't. That's not failure. That's proof you can make it." She looked up at him. Their eyes met, and something warm passed between them. Not romance. Not yet. But trust. That night, Caleb left the door to his room cracked open, just in case she needed anything. And Grace finally slept through the night, her hand resting protectively over her belly, and her heart no longer carrying the weight of the world alone. The day her water broke, it was storming. Not snow this time, but a wild, spring thunderstorm that rattled the windows and lit up the sky like a strobe light. Caleb had just gotten back from town with supplies when he found Grace gripping the countertop, her knees buckling. "I think it's time," she gasped, sweat already forming on her forehead. He didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, ignoring her protests, and carried her to the truck with Owen trailing behind, eyes wide but brave. The nearest hospital was 45 minutes away, and the roads were slick. Caleb white-knuckled the wheel the whole way. "You're doing great," he kept repeating, trying to sound calm even though his heart was in his throat. Grace bit down on her lip through every contraction, gripping his hand until her knuckles went white. And when they arrived, when the nurses rushed her into the delivery room, Caleb didn't leave her side, not for a second. She screamed. She cried. She nearly gave up. But then, at 3:27 a.m., her baby boy took his first breath. She named him Elijah. Tiny, red-faced, wailing like he had a lifetime of stories to tell. Caleb held him second. He looked down at the baby, then at Grace, exhausted but glowing. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," she whispered. "We did." The hospital gave her a few days to rest. Caleb brought Owen a visit, and the boy insisted on holding the baby like a big brother would. Grace watched, heart swelling, unsure when her life had become filled with so much light. But she knew one thing with certainty. She was never going back. And just when things seemed like they were settling, her lawyer called. The court had issued a temporary restraining order against Dylan. The case was being investigated, and there was already buzz about the evidence she'd provided. A tabloid even picked up the story under an anonymous source. Wife of wealthy tech exec claims she was sold and abandoned. Case under investigation. But Grace no longer shook when his name was mentioned. She smiled, because she wasn't just a survivor now. She was a mother. Back at the cabin a week later, Caleb installed a new crib beside Owen's room. Grace cooked dinner with a baby monitor clipped to her sweatshirt. The smell of chicken and cornbread filled the house. That evening, the three of them, four, counting Elijah, sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees. Grace turned to Caleb, her voice quieter than usual. "Do you think someone like me could really start over?" He met her eyes. "You already have." She bit her lip. "You know what scares me?" "What?" "That I'm starting to feel happy. Like, really happy. And it feels so fragile. Like if I breathe too hard, it'll vanish." Caleb reached over and took her hand. "It won't vanish. Not this time. Because you're not alone. And happiness doesn't break that easy when it's built on something real." She looked at him, eyes glassy, and said the words she had never said aloud to anyone since Elijah's birth. "You saved me, Caleb." But Caleb shook his head slowly. "No, Grace. You saved yourself. I just happened to be there." 6 months later, Grace stood behind the counter of her new business, a small coffee and bookshop in the heart of Cedar Hollow. She wore a faded blue apron, hair tied in a bun, and Elijah strapped to her chest. Owen was at the register, pretending to be a cashier and charming every customer who walked in. The sign on the door read, "Everyday Miracles Cafe." Caleb walked in after closing time, his boots still muddy from the garage. He kissed Elijah on the forehead, nodded toward the full tip jar, and said with a smile, "Told you people would come." Grace looked around the shop. Walls painted soft yellow, shelves filled with donated books, tables handmade by Caleb himself, and exhaled slowly. "I still wake up thinking it's all a dream." He leaned in closer. "Then don't wake up." Their eyes met, and this time, the space between them didn't hold just trust. It held something warmer, deeper. And when he kissed her, soft and slow, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. They got married on a warm October day beneath a grove of trees behind the cabin. Owen stood beside Caleb as the best man. Grace walked down the makeshift aisle barefoot, holding Elijah on her hip, laughing when he sneezed in the middle of the vows. There were no photographers, no expensive decorations, no designer gowns, but there was peace, and laughter, and love that had been carved from the ugliest circumstances and turned into something unshakable. She wasn't just someone's wife anymore. She was her own miracle, and every day she woke up, tucked between the man who loved her and the son who saved her, she remembered the night she stood barefoot in the snow and whispered, "Thank you," to the man who didn't look away.